All right, well, we have a pretty solid backbone for our track. We've got all the beats in, we've got our bass line, and we're going to start adding the synth parts now. So in this video, I want to focus on adding the piano, the electric piano part, which is playing the main chords in the song and is really kind of, in my opinion, the heart and soul of the track. It's what gives it that kind of groovy, soulful vibe. So for that sound, I used a plugin by Applied Acoustic Systems, AAS, called Lounge Lizard EP4. If you don't have this plugin, what this plugin is doing is it's modeling electric pianos, so like the old Rhodes and Wurlitzer electric pianos. If you don't have this plugin, Ableton actually has a stock a stock instrument called Electric, which is doing something similar. It's also made by AAS. It's modeling electric pianos. There's a preset for it. I believe it's under piano and keys. It's an instrument rack preset, and it's called, let me see if I can find it if you want to check it out, Old School Rhodes. That's going to give you a similar sound to what I'm getting out of Lounge Lizard. So again, if you don't have the plugin and you kind of want to follow along and rebuild this, you could use that. But I am going to use the Lounge Lizard plugin because I really like the sound of it. So for this instrument, and you can hear if I just play some notes, it's got a really nice kind of warm modulated sound to it. So I took one of the default presets and actually made a subcategory or sub-bank for myself with presets that I started making. I took one of the original presets. I'm going to be honest with you, I don't remember exactly what it was, but I tweaked it, and then I made a preset called EPO2. And this is the sound that I used for this particular track. So we're going to use that sound right there. And you can hear right now, obviously, if I play a single note, we hear a single note and it sounds fine. I'm just kind of layering together a chord there. But I actually used Ableton Live's MIDI effect called Chord to just allow me to generate some quick chords on single key presses. So if I go to MIDI effects, we've got the chord effect here, and I've made a whole bunch of presets for myself. There's some really good ones in here if you've never looked at this device. I made a few for myself specifically for house music. So for example, this Classic House 1, I think this is the preset I used, where I've just kind of added additional voices to give me sort of this like stacked jazz chord. So if you want to like pause the video and just kind of copy this, you'll hear the sound it gives me. And if you remember our bass line, we wrote the bass line in G minor. So if I hit a G note right now on my keyboard, it's going to give me this nice warm modulated jazzy chord from the electric piano. And so what's happening here is I'm hitting a G note, but it's adding 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 additional notes on top of that G note that are separated at these different intervals that I've dialed in with these shift dials. So what I'm getting here is what's called parallel harmony, and that basically means that we're keeping the exact same note distance between all the notes in the chord. And this is a technique you hear in a lot of, particularly deep house music, because in a lot of like the 80s and 90s deep house music, a lot of these chords were actually sampled from old jazz or funk records. And, you know, if you sampled a chord from a jazz record and you put it in a sampler, if you played it higher, you know, you put it in a sampler, you play it on the keyboard. If you play it higher or lower on the keyboard, you're hearing the same note interval between any pitches. So by triggering a different note, you're essentially just hitting the root note of the chord, but all the, you know, the additional notes you're going to hear on top of that are going to be the same interval apart. So it's this kind of sound that's become synonymous with deep house music when you're writing chords. So I really like the sound of it. And that's what I used for the track. So let's get our chord part written in. And then probably before the end of this video, we'll add some extra processing to this sound to just kind of bring it out a little bit more. And a little tiny bit of mix down, just, you know, getting it to stick out a little bit more in the mix of everything that we've got here. But we'll really dial in its level and everything when we do our proper mix down later. But let's get a couple of different variations in here. So I'm actually going to play these in by hand with my MIDI controller. So let's get some of our different parts playing here. That'll work. Let's get the bass going. Let's play the simple bass one. Okay, so let's play something in here. Everything is playing right now. I'm going to hit the record button here on this empty clip slot. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, let's hit the record button again. That's going to stop the recording and just start looping the clip back for us. I hit the record button a little late, so we'll just kind of shorten it down. So I think even just using this one version that I played in here, let me stop the playback for a second. Even if we just use this one clip, I've already got 2 ideas for variations on that. So we'll keep one that's like this full pattern. I mean, I basically played in a 2-bar pattern twice. So we'll just keep the first 2-bar pattern there. And then this second version down here, what I'm thinking of doing is we turn it into a 1-bar, or we'll turn it into 2-bar long pattern, but we'll just keep the notes that I played in bar 1 and just mute the notes that I had in bar 2. So we'll have kind of a simplified version where we've got this bar of space, and then the bass can kind of groove for the second bar there. So let's maybe rename this one Simple 1, something like that. Let's spell simple right. And then this one we'll call Simple 2. And I'll probably do a more full pattern as well. Let's move these guys to the top. Well, actually, we'll keep them down here so they're kind of lined up with the different bass parts. Let's actually hear how Simple 2 sounds with bass 2. Simple bass 2. So if I hold Shift and I select both of these, we can kind of see what's going on with both of these different patterns here. Okay, let's create a longer, more full version of this chord progression. So I'll use this empty slot that I freed up here. And I'm going to do something similar to what I've done in these first 2 bars. I think I'm going to repeat that a few times, but I'm going to make this, I think we'll make it 8 bars long. And at the end of the 8th bar, I'm going to create sort of like a turnaround moment where the chords change a little bit just to kind of signify the end of one section and the beginning of a new section. So I'm going to hit the record button up here again. Let's get our full bass going this time. Let me stop this clip. We'll hit record up here now. 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Shorten that up. These notes were a little short here. I wanted these to extend each for 2 beats long. Yeah, so we got this kind of turnaround moment here. We're kind of signifying a change. Let's hear it all together. Looks like I got a little extra note in there. Let's get rid of that. And if you recall, I think in the bass video I pointed this out, but I have the record quantization turned on to 16th notes. That's why all my playback is perfectly quantized to the grid right now. I'm not that good at playing stuff in, I promise. And if you recall, we used this groove pool swing, this MPC 16 double down 70. Let's throw that on these different piano parts as well, and we'll hear how that kind of enhances the vibe a little bit, makes them sound a little bit more funky. Yeah, so you can hear how certain notes are coming in late. If I switch to a 16th note grid here, and we kind of zoom in a little bit, this note's coming in late, note's coming in late. Just adds that vibe to it. I really like that. Something else you might have noticed is that I'm using swing on like almost everything right now. I think everything. Maybe not these percussion loops, because they've already got a little bit of natural swing to them. But everything else has these swing patterns on them. But you're noticing probably that I'm not hitting the commit button here. Now you can absolutely do that if you want to, and what that's going to do, if I just kind of test it for you right now, you can see that it manually goes in and moves, like this note here is off the grid. This note here is off the grid. So it'll go in and manually move the notes so that they show up visually off the grid. However, I'm going to undo that. I like to leave the groove set here, but I don't like to commit it. And the reason for that is if I add new notes to this pattern at any point in time in the future, it will keep the same swing on those newly added notes. If I hit commit right now, and then I want to plug in a note right here, you can see how this note is not swung. This note is swung. This one's coming in late. So if I were to like play in new notes or draw in new notes, I'm not going to hear the effect of the swing on those notes unless I go in and I reset the groove and then I hit commit again. So I like to leave like I said, the groove set there without hitting commit. And when I export the audio, when I finish this track and I export the audio, the groove will stay applied to these parts. So it's going to write that to the audio. So you don't really have to worry about committing it if you don't want to. but I do understand that sometimes visually it can be helpful to see how things are kind of hitting late. I like to leave it off though, so we're gonna leave the commit function off. Let's wrap this video up, but before we do, let's add a little bit of processing to the Lounge Lizard electric piano here, just to kind of make it a little deeper, but also bring it out in the mix a little bit more. If I recall, in the original track, I used an auto filter, and I think I used a 12 dB slope. Let me just look at my notes here. Yes, I did. And I kind of rolled off the high frequencies just to make it really sort of warm and mellow sounding. So I think I cut off around 582, and then I had the resonance up a bit, just to kind of boost that, 500-600 hertz area. Let's hear how this sounds. You hear how it just brings out that kind of mid-range warmth a little bit more. We don't get as much of the top end. Add a little bit more processing to this. Let's add a chorus effect. Gonna add a little bit more movement modulation to the sound. Already that sounds pretty cool, but it's a little extreme. I just want to dial it back a little bit. So let's adjust this high pass input filter. I had that at about 300 hertz. Had the modulation amount left at the default value of 1.9 milliseconds. The rate, same default 1.01 milliseconds, or I'm sorry, 1.01 hertz. And then the dry wet, I'm just going to pull that down a little bit. Just a little extreme right now. And this high pass, by the way, this is just cutting out any low end as the signal goes into the chorus. So basically the wet version of the signal that's hitting on delay 1 here is not getting any low end pass through it. Just to kind of boost the volume back up, because the chorus kind of spread the sound out and made us lose a little bit of the mid-range volume, which is okay, but just to kind of compensate for that, I'm going to put a utility after it and just boost the gain up a little bit. Just like 2 dB or something. And I want to kind of, as I'm adding processing here, keep an eye on these gain stage meters and just make sure none of these effects are causing my signal to clip, and nothing is right now. We're still under 0. We're still nice and clean and green. Let's put a limiter on this just to kind of even out the signal dynamically and maybe just see if we could squeeze a little bit more gain out of it. Nothing too drastic here. You'll see the gain reduction. It's very, very minimal, and when it does kick in, it's just very momentarily on the peaks. That's all I really want for this sound. Keep the ceiling at 0 dB so we can get as much volume out of it as we can without clipping it. Let's add a little bit of EQ to this just to cut out any excessive low end. So when I add processing like this, I'm kind of doing a combination of sound designing to this sound and also a little bit of mixing. But any sort of mixing moves I'm gonna make, like with this EQ, I'm just gonna do like really quick moves, nothing really drastic here. Like we don't need any of these sub frequencies, so we can cut this out. Cut it about 200 hertz or so. Maybe we'll cut the very top end. We don't really need anything up here above like 10K or so, maybe a little higher than that. But that's anything that is kind of popping in there is just gonna interfere with hi-hats and other high-end elements in the track. I'm gonna use the steeper cutoff slope here. Yeah, just to get rid of any ultra high frequencies that we don't really need here. And then lastly, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put an auto pan on this, and I'm gonna treat that more or less like a sidechain compressor, and I'll show you how I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna take the phase control all the way down. If I turn up the amount now, we just have this sine wave that's modulating the volume. I'm gonna switch it so it's in synced mode, and then I'm gonna use this offset to just kind of, you can see how it's shifting the phase of the LFO. I want to set it to about, what did I have it at? 110 degrees or something like that. So if you look closely at this, let me change the rate as well to a quarter note. But if we look closely at this, what's happening is at the beginning of each quarter note, this sine wave LFO is causing the volume to duck down and then ramp back up, and duck down and ramp back up. So it's doing something similar to what a sidechain compressor would be doing, but it's just doing it by modulating the volume with an LFO. I had have the amount at about 70%. So I don't want to go too extreme with this. Sounds kind of cool, but I feel like we lose too much energy on certain chords. But I want a little bit of that effect, so we have the amount at about 70. This is a trick I use for a lot of, anytime I'm sidechain compressing to a kick drum that's just playing like a 4 on the floor straight pattern, I almost always use this trick, so if I need to, I can freeze the track. If you've ever tried freezing a track with sidechain compressors on it, it won't let you. So I could freeze the track. It also just gives me a little bit more sculptability over how the volume's being modulated, so I like using this technique for that. Similar to using if you have like LFO Tool or Kickstart or any of those plugins. Similar concept here. But I think that'll do it for just the sound design processing for this piano sound, these chords. Like I said, this is really, I think, the heart and soul of the track. So without this sound, the track just wouldn't feel the same. All right, so moving on, we're going to look at a couple of the other synth sounds in the next few videos. I will see you there.
Thanks everybody for watching, commenting, and indeed liking. We really do appreciate all the support we get here on our Sonic Academy YouTube channel. So if you found this video super useful, please, we'd love you to hit the subscribe button. We update the YouTube channel every week with new content. And if you want to watch some more relevant content, just click on the videos beside me.